Good day, and welcome to this collage of worship elements or parts and sharing that we have from God's house for June 21st, which is Father's Day in the calendar here in the American continent. I want to talk a little bit about the meaning of father and what that is or has been for me in my life and experience. I want to thank Jackie and Tim for their part of the music and Tim for preaching this Sunday, but just a little special extra thing from my own experience of being a child and having a father. First, I want to talk a moment about what father means for us as Christians and biblically and theologically. Historically, long before we had genetics and an understanding of the sciences, it was thought that the man planted a seed of a little human being inside of a woman, and that therefore the seed was like the father. And this was an image, a metaphor, that the early church leaders picked up on as they were trying to talk about and resolve the problem they were having in the church over arguments over, is Jesus divine or is he human? How do you resolve that paradox of being fully divine and fully human? And so they used the image of father because the thought was that the child being like the father, having been the father's seed implanted in a woman, carried the same authority. And so that was why father was chosen and has been used for centuries. But our understanding of genetics has changed. And we understand now that it takes both a father and a mother, that parenting is not something that one person does alone. And so the traits of parents might be more appropriate in some ways to speak of when we speak of God, because God does both. Nurture, all the gender issues that we have with that, God does it all. But the father image is one that we pick up when we talk about, the nut doesn't fall far from the tree. The father has a large influence on the children. And so what I wanted to do today is to pick a few of the things that I have learned from my father by living and being around him and having his influence in my life. The first thing I would like to share is a memory that goes way, way back to my very early childhood. I can remember I was out in California on a trip. My aunt was getting married, and my mom and dad were in the hotel room trying to keep this little 3-year-old or 2-year-old active. And I had a coloring book, and Dad was laying on the floor with me, and we were coloring, and I was having trouble deciding what colors to use sometimes. And so he started coloring the wheels on the truck, and he picked up one of each of my 8 colors and made rainbows on the wheels. I have loved the image of hope that he taught me then and imagination that he gave me as we shared together on the floor, just coloring the wheels of a truck that go round and round. Another memory I have is I was a bit older. I was in the 1st grade, and I had gotten my first allowance. And with that allowance came responsibility. I was supposed to spend it on certain things, and I needed to learn how to budget. My father began teaching me, my mother also, how to manage money. But a part of that was, along around October, November of my 1st grade year, came the Every Member Canvas. I don't know if any of you remember those times when they used to come around and the church was trying to plan its budget for the next year. And then it needed to know who was going to be giving how much. And so we made this pledge during the Every Member Canvas. And officers, leaders in the church were assigned families to go to, and every family, every member of the church was visited during this canvas. Well, when the elders arrived at our household, and I am the oldest of 8 children. At the age of 6, there were only 4 or 5 of us. But I was the only one with the allowance at the time. But I remember this happening. My father said, "My wife and I are not the only 2 with an income. You must see each of our children who has an allowance and do their individual every member canvas too." My dad taught me stewardship. He taught the elders how to do stewardship with children. It's a lesson that has stayed with me in my giving, a spirit of generosity and responsibility in community to give back. Later on, I began to overhear conversations about my parents and some of the things they were doing. And then I, right after graduating from college, worked for them for a couple of years as a secretary bookkeeper. And I would hear even more there about some of his ethics in business. Now, we live in Alabama. And at that time, there was a lot of corruption in state government. And the State Department of Transportation and the bidding and letting of contracts for construction projects involved a lot of kickbacks. My dad had a concrete business, and he refused to participate in that. It cost him a number of jobs. It cost him economically. But he had his integrity, and I saw the sense of dignity with which he held to that. I learned integrity from my dad. Then there was later on, because I only worked for them for a few years, we were still graduating from college when my parents, at the age of 50, both decided to go back to second career education. My mom went to law school. She was very good and very sharp with understanding finer points of things. My dad, on the other hand, felt called to the ministry. So he went to seminary. And for me, that was the faith and the development of a sense of calling that grows throughout life. And it can sometimes call you to different places and to doing different things. To trust that, to embrace it. It's kind of like Abraham, that faith that gives us courage to get up and to leave Ur of the Chaldees and to go, God knows where, but God knows, so I'm going, and do what God has called us to do. The courage to get up and take a step of faith into something that sounds really big and really unknown. And the last thing that I want to share today, and it's not the last thing he taught me, I'm sure, but just of the little list that I've made for today, I really don't know what to call it. There's a sense of compassion, of justice, of reconciliation, that hope coming back in, that integrity. But my dad, in his ministry, his first pastorate was in a local congregation. And when he discovered some problems there, he decided that he needed to let the presbytery deal with it, and he moved on. And he discovered that he had a gift in working with interim ministry, in dealing with churches that were going through some trouble, some trauma, some conflict, some pain, and finding a new way through that so that they would then be prepared for when they called their next full-time pastor. He specialized in those short-term interims where a congregation might be going through a short time of change and having to resolve some issues. In those times, there's a lot of conflict. And I don't know anybody that really likes conflict. I certainly don't. But what my dad began to show in his ministry, and show to me as a pastor then at that time as I was moving into that same direction, is that courage, that compassion, that sense of justice and love, and hope for reconciliation and healing where there has been conflict. Something that, for me, is about believing in God's ability to transform people and communities into something better. Learning from my father has been a lifelong journey, and I'm grateful for that. I'd like for you to think about some things you might have learned from your father, to make a little gratitude list and to say thank you. I think I'm going to have to send the link to this to my dad so he can see it. But what would you send to your dad? How would you say, this is what I've learned from you? These are the values that I have gained. These are the life lessons that have helped me as I have gone through my times. God bless you, God bless your families, and God bless all the dads who have taught their children well. Amen.